G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 25th of the 12th. Merry Christmas everybody. I really had wished I had better news, but of course, before Russia even decided whether or not there was going to be a Christmas ceasefire, Ukraine carried out not one but two terrorist attacks within 12 hours of each other in Moscow, forcing Putin's hand. Of course, Ukraine is never condemned for this terrorism because the West are hypocrites. Europe doesn't condemn actions by its special operations operatives. And of course, Russia will inflict punishment on Ukraine. No doubt the British officer in Ukraine is not the first and only British officer to have died. But, as I say, fuck around and find out. You should not be on the front lines or anywhere near the war zone if you're a non-combatant. Or, as I suspect, right, this was an attempt to gain public sympathy to get permission for war, the same as when LBJ and St. Kennedy himself put US advisors in the firing line in Vietnam, thus escalating a war that could have been over within a year. And when you actually had a reasonable peace deal, you didn't want it. And then you're forced out of that situation by many circumstances. Nixon did the right thing, even though most people don't care anymore. They want their narratives. They want their fifis, which is why most people don't understand why you should not admit Ukraine to NATO unless you're going to admit Russia. See, if you admit Ukraine, you're basically expansionist. You're playing into the very paranoia, the fear, the propaganda that you Europeans used to bleat about all the way through the Cold War. Expansionism, expansionism, expansionism. All the anti-NATO protesters, where are they? Silenced by the very people they put into power. For the anti-warmongers, well, all the people who protested Vietnam, Iraq, Panama, Grenada, running their mouths off about Afghanistan, and Iraq, and Cuba, though nothing official happened in Cuba, but you know what I mean, right? All the paranoia that goes on from the left, not a peep. They're bloodthirsty, because remember, it's always rules for thee, and that is why they want Ukraine, right? They are fascists. Every accusation from the left is a confession. Now, Ukraine and Russia are completely different economies. Ukraine is primarily a primary industry, whereas Russia, well, a lot of its GDP is gas and oil, that's true, but primarily their economy is internal. They don't export much, but they don't import much either. So their economy sits around $2 trillion currently and has grown, though they say by 0.6%, yet if you look at it, you go, wait a minute, they're up to they're up 12th place. They've fallen from, 10th in 5 years. But they're up from 1.8 a few years ago to 2. So this quarterly growth of 0.6%, last quarter was, well, Putin 1%. It's actually 0.99 something to be precise, okay? And, Putin wasn't precise on 0.9. No, it's almost 1%. It was like a fraction off 1%. Unemployment in Russia, record low, and that does not include the military. Okay, because the military, right? Right, when they're talking about unemployment, right? The fact is, Russia's army has only grown a nominal amount, right? Most of the fighting, and that is the fighting force, that is the voluntary fighting force. Now, the budget deficit hangs around they say 2.6, but it's actually much lower than that. But Russia's economic windfalls are mostly frozen. This would be way down, okay? Now, Russia is slowly catching up. This is why the Russian economy has only slowly grown, because most of what Russia imported was actually gold, right? They would buy economic instruments around the world, and they have done so for 20 years. Putin slowly built up the Russian investment fund, mostly paid for with gas and oil. They built up, right, this huge investment, which is why they sold cheap gas to Europe, so that European cars, etc., would be highly profitable. Because Russian investment. Same with real estate, Russian investment. Now, they would then take all this cash through Euroclear and import the gold back to Russia. Or use that to pay for their imports, thus still creating a huge budget windfall for the taxes, because they'd sell the goods cheaply, but the profit goes to the state as revenue. Right? So you can understand, yes, sanctions, but hotels and catering are growing in Russia. Russians are seeing a huge tourist spike from India, not so much from China. This is where most of the Russian economy is only down because its investments in China and its tourism from China, in trade from China, is down. It's fluctuating greatly. Agriculture, mostly exports to India, declines. Mining, which is China's their biggest customer. Transport, biggest customer, China. Wholesale retail, again, most of their exports China, most of their imports China. And real estate, without the foreign real estate market, which they were one of the largest participants in the world, again, that's most of this real estate holdings is down because of sanctions. Outlook and beyond, modest growth. Again, however, high interest rates to continue to make sure, right? Because a lot of Russians have had cash windfalls, and Putin wants them not to borrow, but to have children. So to discourage spending, the interest rates, particularly credit cards, are very high. The war spending, however, is under increasing pressure to keep pace with the global inflation of around 1.1%. America is sitting around 2.1%. China is looking at a possible hyperinflationary collapse if they don't, with the collapse of 900 banks. So, while Russia's economy is heavily influenced by the conflict in Ukraine, they are remaining sanction-proof, right? As their allies continue to provide the short-term shortfalls, as Russia continues to develop its internal economy to be sanction-proof. Whereas Ukraine's GDP, allegedly around 210 million, yet I've seen figures as low as 57. Why is it so wildly changing? Remember last year it was well under 100 million, although they claimed it was much higher than that. 2023, the GDP is allegedly increased by 5.3%, and then 2024 by 3.6%. Ukraine is poor. They average 104 million. The rest, right, no growth. They had no growth, but then they hit an all-time high and then a record low. Why is it fluctuating so much? Foreign aid. Many countries do this. Ukraine isn't the only one. Foreign aid is laundered through the Ukrainian banks in order to artificially print lots of money, and then they claim we had a GDP revenue growth. And that money is used to pay out their internal liabilities, such as pensions. But even that, right, the foreign aid then is taken and immediately used to buy arms, even if it's for any foreign aid to Ukraine, eventually is used to buy arms. They launder it through banks, turn it into local currency, but they overprint money. That's why their economy is so unstable. GDP per capita. See, this is why this figure is so unreliable, because their GDP per capita is only 6,000 per annum. Nominal means they're not sure. Okay, that's what reported, but they don't believe it. It's a nominal amount. It's just it's what they claim. How much? Then they don't know how much of that is foreign aid. See, Ukraine exports and imports double, right? It exports its drones to Poland to be upscaled, but they're imported back and they're still claimed. So their imports and exports are totally imbalanced, right? Because the drones, they claim that are produced in Poland or England as produced in Ukraine, thus rigging their own economy again and printing more money again. While Ukraine's economy shows signs of growth, extraordinary challenges, aka cooked books, they're not the only country in the world who's cooked books, okay? Most of Africa, China is infamous. India is starting to be called out, but there's no punishment for cooking the books in this world, okay? I mean, after all, Biden cooked the books, did he not? With the COVID relief and they're not publishing how many people died from COVID. They all cook the books, people. It's just how much and how often. But can you imagine the GDP of Ukraine is almost the same as the GDP of Cuba. And Cuba, Morocco, and Kuwait, right, actually produce gas and oil in vast quantities. Well, Cuba doesn't produce vast quantities, compared to Ukraine, that is. But I think Cuba's gas and oil production is actually investments in Venezuela, although I don't know for certain. Because Caribbean, a lot of it is actually owned by Russia, and a lot of it, gas. They rely on predominantly on imports and oil reserves. Yeah, they have an offshore. They do have offshore facilities, but often, even Canada, other companies and countries control Cuba's gas and oil, but they get a cut, okay? But it's not enough, and they have to import more. It's not enough to meet their demand, and that's mostly because they have to sell so much of it again for their GDP. Same with Ukraine. Like, Ukraine still has a few gas and oil, but it's mostly those few remaining gas and oil plants are operated by foreign companies. And most of them are damaged, not due to the war, just due to the fact that they can't afford it, keep upkeep, right? That's why and remember, GDP isn't profit. It's just the value of goods and services estimated to be produced within those borders. And remember, often they include foreign aid and some imports when they're like importing drones and other, and also remember they include foreign Ukrainian remittance, right? All the families, right? They're allowed to send one person outside the country as long as they send money back. Otherwise, their family will starve. And of course, on the promise that in the future their wife and children, which never happens, right? Or they send the mother, and eventually they'll get their children, which is why there's so many alone or orphan children in Ukraine, right? Their mothers are lining up to do OnlyFans for Andrew Tate, allegedly. You know, I don't know if it's true. I doubt every Ukrainian woman is working for Andrew Tate, okay? I think they're trying to paint Andrew Tate as the boogeyman for the sex trade, which is really a huge issue in Europe. But Zelensky can't afford his army. This is why you can't admit Ukraine to NATO. They want you to pay for their army. He wants an army of... the Trump plan capped it at 600,000, but Zelensky wants 800,000, but admits he can't afford it. He still wants his job as Captain Skysheild. Okay, he wants a huge air defense industry in Ukraine. Again, this is all about propping up his GDP because he gets a cut. He's making $386,000 a year. It's ridiculous for a country with the average income of $6,000 a year. That's like Trump paying himself $1 billion. He's probably the greediest dictator in Europe. He makes Ceausescu look like a saint. And again, remember how Ceausescu was protected for a long time by Europe until the people turned against him. But Ukraine primarily should not be admitted to NATO because you need a buffer zone. Now, even Zelensky admits he wants a buffer zone with Russia, a demilitarized zone. Fine. There's your three states. Demilitarize that central area up to Kiev. And then you have Russia. But see, he wants by demilitarized, he means no border guards, nothing. No police, nothing. That's ludicrous. Always read the fine print, people. You can't admit Ukraine for at least 3 decades. You need to clean up Ukraine. Okay? You need to reform all their policing, all their training. You have to reform their schools. You have to isolate and remove from government all the fanatics. Do what you did in Serbia. Ban anybody who served in the military from government. Although that really hasn't worked in Serbia either. So that's neither here nor there. Allegedly banned, by the way, because I don't think that was ever codified in the law. But there's so much you could do with Ukraine without needing to put in NATO troops, without even needing a 600,000 army, let alone an 800,000 army. The problem is, remember folks, as called out by Viktor Orban, and he is in position to know this, right? Macron, Merkel 2.0, and Cuckoo Cocoa Puffs, Keir Starmer are all profiting off this war. And their backers are profiting off this war. And he says they should be treated as war criminals. Absolutely. War profiteering. This is why there's no incentive for Ukraine to end this war. Zelensky is war profiteering. Look at the enormous wage he pays himself. Now, as we look at the Ukraine map today, Russia again has pounded them and you're going to ask, where's the Chechen revenge? They're cooking, okay? Revenge is a dish best served cold, okay? The Chechens are cooking right now. As soon as their plan is ready and it's hatched, Zelensky will be the last to know. I'll be the last. Zelensky will know before me, right? But you're not going to get this news anywhere else, right? You're not going to get an honest assessment from any. Most of the other channels are all pro-Ukrainian, all bots, right? The little fascists sit there and watch it and go, we're winning. Oh, look, we hurt Russia. More dead orcs. You're never going to convince those people to the truth. They have to be. This is why the war has to continue. You have to burn them out, right? Grind them. That's what Russia's doing. They're sacrificing a few compared to how many people die in Ukraine. Otherwise, Putin would just go full Orninsk. And I'm yet to outline that strategy, but the basic outline is, how big's Kharkiv? Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So let's say 12 to 24 missiles. Bang! Most of Kharkiv are ruined. Hey, Zelensky, you going to surrender? No? Okay, let's go to Savitsk. Another 24 to 36 missiles. Boom! Most of the town destroyed. Next day, you won't surrender? Bang! Next day, bang! You know, that's 360,000 Ukrainians dead. Just in those 3 days. You going to continue the war then? The only reason why he isn't doing it is the threat of nuclear war from Britain. And as called out by J.D. Vance, he now thinks Britain's nuclear arsenal is a threat to the world because two-tier Starmer is falling into a dictatorship and looking to appoint more Muslims to his government. Appoint, not elected. Appoint. Hasn't it sunk in yet? Britain is now 1984. Britain is now airstrip 1. Britain has gone full fascist. But the people, bread and circus, my friends. Most of the people are still stuck in bread and circus. Zelensky has claimed to have liberated Kupiansk, yet their own maps say the Russians have recaptured some of Kupiansk. They were down to this block here. They were up to the K79, P79. Now they're up here. They were at this line. Now they're past it. They were above the Kupiansk. Now they're below it. So it may be a slow slog, but remember, all those Ukrainians they sent in to fight those Russians, the offensive was halted by the Russians, and now Russia is killing all those men who are sent in. And they can't retreat because Zelensky won't allow it. So they're doomed. Once again, 10 to 50,000 men over the next month are going to die for Zelensky's vanity project. Meanwhile, the manpower that could have been used elsewhere to halt and hold Russia in check and get a peaceful settlement, again, had opportunity lost. So Ukraine will know by mid-January or mid-February, Ukraine will no longer have the ability to halt Russian advances. And unless more manpower, of course, is found, which is possible, Ukraine does have several million men still outside of Ukraine. And I do think some of those at least are held in reserve, right? Seen by the views counts and fanatics in the various Ukrainian forums, particularly in Canada. There's easy another 100,000 just in Canada alone, willing to die for idiocracy. And I think most people out there do not care if they do so. But Russia is within 5 kilometers of Lyman. So Russia's advanced in the Lyman area. Savitsk is lost. Russia has taken Savitsk. Savitsk is lost. and other areas as well. Seversk is lost. Russia's overrun the Ukrainians in Seversk. But it's not, and it's not like Chavez Yar where there's still a little bit in this blue line. This blue line actually is Chavez Yar, this area here. I've checked it several maps. It does actually dispute how much is in Russian control, but primarily it's this part here that overlaps, right? This part here is some sort of forested area. There's actually a road through here that is littered with dead Ukrainians and machinery. Same here. Every day they they send in an incursion force that dies. It's ridiculous. A lot of your drone attacks here, same thing. But Russia's advanced south of Kursk. Here we have more fighting, renewed offensive, not much, but parts of Myriad have fallen, but not much. Okay, it's a small incursion. If you zoom in and you can see that's just this part down here. It is a small incursion on the outskirts. I think this is the industrial estate. Or this is also an industrial estate, but this is the... there's not much here. Although some of these... remember, Ukraine puts out a lot of false information right now. But that's to confuse the Russians, says the Glazers. No, Russia has all the maps. Russia knows where everything is. Russia can see, right? They have satellites. I don't. Russia's made advances here. A little bit here. One place they haven't. Oh, yes, they have. Around it, but not here. They're going around. They're cutting it off. A little bit of advancing here and here. Little bit of advancing here. And, well, maybe a little bit. I would say maybe a few streets. But it also, also the rest of the map. There's a little bit of advancing here. And again, Russia is, Ukraine is losing the ability to hold back Russia. All because they had to carry out, 6 offensives instead of defensive lines. Remember, right, had Ukraine dug hills, well, by dug hills, I mean, you scoop out the ground down and pile it up here, creating a downward pit, tank pit, and a high earthen wall, and you control everything behind that wall. And if Russia advances, you blow that wall as you after you retreat. Basically, the Mannheim line, or even the Siegfried line, or the Kursk line. The Germans did this to the Russians quite effectively. Tank pits and tank trees. Ukraine was given enough money and had 10 years to prepare for this war. I think there's a lot of strategists out there, if they were given 10 years to prepare for a war, and the enemy only having 3 years to prepare for the war, because they didn't believe it would happen. They didn't believe the Europeans would be that stupid. Most people still wonder why, right? Again, Ukrainian terrorism, and then Russia blamed for the war. But still, right? Earthen walls, even Russia's bolted 203s. What did they do? They took 6 months to dismantle Kursk, right? That's when they had US backing, US ammunition. Half their tanks were coming from America. Their fuel, American fuel deliveries, because they highly refined diesel, which is more efficient and harder to freeze. Lots of antifreeze, so they could operate through the winter. You think, right? If America was putting, even Europe, right, did all this and built up these walls, Russia would have accepted the peace deal 22, right? You'd only have lost 15% of Ukraine. Russia didn't have the Omsk missile then. They were still in development. The Su-35 still had a lot of bugs, and they're still working out some of the kinks. The S-70, the Hunter and Archer program are a failure. Costly drones, electronic warfare, targeted electronic warfare, targeted lasers. Yeah, a lot of bugs to be worked out in that program. MiG-37, they're reinvesting in the MiG-31 for another 5 years. The MiG-37 is delayed, but the MiG-37 is delayed, but the Su-35, I meant, is going ahead. Su-25s will become a larger export, although it looks like Syria won't be buying any. It looks like the French twisted their arm there, or the Israelis, because I think they actually do have interest in the French FAL. Otherwise, they would be pushing the Mirage. But again, I think the Mirage is also on its way out. So, yeah, and Chinese arms, again, most countries are abandoning Chinese arms, except ammunition because it's cheap. But even then, most of the ammunition, they're only buying for those that come from Russian-controlled plants in China. So, yeah, and same with India and China. But most of those in China, if they're not Russian-controlled, those ammunition is going to the state anyway. But those who are controlled by Russia go to Russia or India predominantly. But yeah, there's some arms sold by India to Ukraine through third parties. Now, key events, as I said, there's lots of bullshit, but Ukraine brags that the asshole press that they carried out terrorism, killing 2 police officers they claim took part in the war. There's no proof they did, actually. Ukrainian president bragging that his 20-point peace plan is going to be the absolute bestest ever, that there's peace talks, but Dmitry Peskov says they're waiting from the report from Kirill Dmitry, who met with US envoys in Florida over the weekend, including Marco Rubio, although I believe it was only a phone call. After a brief meeting, Marco Rubio appearing in several news conferences. He's got a bigger fish to fry with the goings-on in Venezuela and Africa, but he still has people with an eye on Ukraine and Russia. The Russian court is carrying out their first case of criticism. Now, you may think it's an attack on free speech, but hey, go to England and call Sama Tutu to his face and see how free speech the West is. Or call the German Chancellor Merkel 2.0. Or accuse him of being a war criminal by sending Ukrainian boys to their deaths. Or tell everybody that Macron is married to a man. See how much free speech you have. So don't criticize Russia if you're a bunch of nandy-pandy wimps and can't stand the words for a British cigarette, or being told that you're a merry old British cigarette, or a mushroom. Okay, majority of Russians were polled allegedly by a pollster in Russia. The Russians published this, and Al Jazeera published this. Now, the majority of Russians, and again, it was a Russian state-owned enterprise that did this, believe that Russian forces making advances on the battlefield means that they're reaching a end game and should be reaching a ceasefire deal. Now, there's growing optimism that 26 will see the end of the war, which is why Europe doesn't want an end to the war, so that Russia will get war fatigue. But trust me, you're going to also have to deal with European war fatigue, because I don't see Gen Z volunteering to fight when you keep telling them they're Islamophobic, homophobic, transphobic, misogynists, and rapists. And then, of course, tell them that they're going to war while they let in more refugees, and refugees will be given housing, but not soldiers. Soldiers don't get housing. The refugees are going to get everything, and the soldiers who fight the war in Ukraine aren't getting anything. So all these Gen Zers out there who are telling all these boomers to go fight their war, it's not my war, it is literally the boomers' war. People who are 20 up to people who are 60 and 65 and over, right? Which is not me. I'm on your side, Gen Z. I don't want to see you go to war either. Okay, which is funny because most Gen Zers don't want to watch my video because they think I'm a boomer who wants to send them to war. I know there's a lot of Gen Zers out there who just cannot be convinced by an old person that they don't want them to be sent to war. Any war, right? Right now, Gen Zers don't want to fight any war because they can't trust the government. They don't, unless there's a direct invasion, most of these people don't want a war. Now, the only reason why Putin was able to get a war in Ukraine in the first place was the atrocities by Ukraine in Donbass, which the rest covered up. Now, Russia never showed them on television. It was Ukraine showing and daring Russia, and Zelensky daring Russia to do something about it. They were bragging they killed all these Ukrainians who were ethnically Russian and dared Putin to do something about it. Well, he did. You fucked around and found out. Now, the majority don't want to know this, but it's going to happen. The majority are waking up. The Bloomberg is a scandalous news outlet being caught yet again lying about the Kremlin. There is no troop withdrawal or anything else, or the Russia plans to amend the Ukraine plan. No, they're waiting on the report on the plan. Not Zelensky. Zelensky's the one who amended it. See, if they're creating these narratives so they can blame Russia, right? Oh, they wouldn't accept the Ukraine plan. Oh, they wouldn't even accept their own plan. They amended the plan and won't accept it. They're just daring Russia to do something. Now, if I was a good old Russian lawyer, but this is a rare thing, if I was a Russian lawyer in the Russian embassy in America, I'd be suing them for slander. But nobody wants that test case, so it'll never happen, right? But slander is not protected. These media outlets are lying every day. And the problem is there's so many lies that the court cases would be stacked up forever. They're getting away with bullshit. Now, one of the problems is, we don't know how much is true is from Russia. But we know Ukraine's lying and being caught lying. More than a third of Ukrainians believe that he should answer to court for the graft scandal, believing that he is known in many circles as the wallet. In other words, he's the one who funds all these projects, gets all these funding, and is believed to have taken a cut. But 30% do not believe he took part and that there's no involvement. Of course, he has to have some sort of base, otherwise he'd be dead by now. Because if he had no base in Ukraine, if he had no popular support, well, he doesn't, but you know what I mean, right? Enough support to manufacture consent, right? This, as far as the British are concerned, 30%'s a majority. Look at Keir Starmer. But Russia now has a plan for the seizure of assets. They are engaging in a test case, which may go to the court. Now, I'm not sure if it's to sue Ursula von der Leyen, Euroclear, and or some politicians, but the case is basically being put together by the Russian, what's it called? Is it called the Justice Ministry? But the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia has said that they have a plan and it'll be implemented only if necessary, but they are waiting the outcome of talks with America, which is the part they won't talk about, but they said it'll be kind of tough. Now, there are still European assets in Russia as well, Some have been seized for non-payment of wages, non-payment of taxes, non-payment of obligations, other obligations, and of course some were completely abandoned and the state took them over to keep them running, but technically have not taken possession. So there is a very complex and complicated tit for tats. And remember, a lot of the assets they froze don't belong to Russia, but belong to Russians. So there is that. Now, gasoline in Russia is not increasing in production yet. They have actual fuel stocks. There's an increased demand worldwide for fuel, particularly, I'm not talking about the war, I'm talking about particularly after the seizure of Venezuelan oil and the sanctions there. India and other countries have looked to Russia to increase. But if Russia increases, as you know, when you increase oil production, the volume price changes, and Russian oil is unscathed, as Rosneft and Lukoil have just basically turned around, sold their sanctioned assets and renewed their operations in unsanctioned countries who won't meet the sanctions, such as China and India. Now, you can sanction them till the cows come home. You're not going to affect China or India's production either, or purchases. Now, the Far East gas supply is still going ahead. Now, this is a BRI/Russian project. Now, this is part of Siberia 2. They're in the final stages. Now, there is an operating pipeline, but it's outdated. And, yeah, Siberia 1 is still in operation. Siberia 2 is said to be much bigger. There's no actual stats that I could compare. But hydrocarbons will remain the predominant energy source for most of the world, despite what the Europeans claim. Ultimately, Ukraine's GDP will not cover the war. The only way Europe will see growth and stabilization is a Eurasian security trade agreement, right? Which means a reduction in NATO, a parity force with with demilitarized zones, these security zones to be jointly not administered but jointly monitored. That say Ukrainian law enforcement will be the law enforcement, but Europe and Russia will monitor. Same with now they're going to have to extend that to Europe, to other parts as well, all the way across the Russian frontier, including and this is where you start getting, once you start including more and more countries. But Eastern Europe has to make a stand and realize that Europe is setting them up to be the front line in a war, so Europe can build their economy by crushing yours. And that is another reason why I can't admit Ukraine into NATO until you have a Eurasian security agreement that will be monitored by Europe, Russia, and America, and that only local security forces. So French army won't be outside of France. German army won't be outside of Germany. There'll be no foreign troops in any other country other than the Western Europe protected by America. Eastern Europe and all the way up to Ukraine will have minimum forces, and the Russian frontier again will be on the Russian side of a buffer zone, and then their forces, which will be parity to Europeans' forces. How hard is that, people? It doesn't take a genius to work this out. Trump worked it out, for Christ's sake, and he's not a military man either. The military, however, want their complex little games because they always want to sneak in an extra few tanks or an extra couple of missiles, or have a sneaky line of defense so that they can beat their chest and say, "Ha ha! I gotcha! We had this sneaky. We put missiles back in Turkey." And Russia says, "Yeah, I knew." So didn't do anything with it, and we also had Satan ready to drop on your head, or no, it wasn't called Satan, then it was called the Tsar. They renamed it. Okay, the largest bomb in the world is Russian. Okay, the most deadliest nuclear weapon ever detonated is Russian. Okay, now whether or not you want to believe that, it's up to you. But Ukraine's GDP is worse than Cuba, right? You really want Cuba on your doorstep and paying them for the rest of their lives? No. This man is just taking you and your sympathies for a ride. And it's about time people stop letting sympathies take them for a ride. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it, each and every one of you. I really do. Thank you. But can you do me a favour? At least hit that like button. And if you want to support the channel, you can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, Buy Me Books, Buy Me Merch. Thanks to all those who have. Really appreciate it. See you in the next video. And bye for now.